Prior to her appointment in 2019, she led the Department of State's Office of Global Criminal Justice, and she served under Ambassador Nikki Haley as the UN States Representative to the UN Economic and Social Council, as well as the alternative representative to the UN General Assembly in 2017 and 2018. Throughout her career in foreign policy, Ambassador Currie has specialized in human rights, political reform, development, and humanitarian issues, with a focus on Asia-Pacific region. She has held senior policy positions with the Department of State, the U.S. Congress, and several international and non-governmental human rights and humanitarian organizations. We're honored to have you with us, Ambassador Currie. Senator Jaffer was supposed to be with us on the panel, but unfortunately, due to last-minute changes, she will not be able to attend. But she was kind to nominate Ms. Sanam Naraghi-Anderlini to speak in her place and on her behalf. Ms. Sanam Naraghi-Anderlini is the director of the Center for Women, Peace and Security at the London School of Economics and Political Science. She is the founder and the CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network, where she spearheaded the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, comprising independent women-led organizations active in 40 countries, preventing violence and promoting peace, rights, and pluralism. Ms. Sanam is a globally recognized advocate in the field of women, peace, and security, with 24 years of experience as a peace strategist working on complex crisis and violent extremism with a mix of civil society, government, and the UN. In 2000, she was a civil society leader, drafter of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And in 2011, she was the first senior expert on gender and luncheon on the UN missions mediation standby team, working on Somalia, Libya, and Syria, among other cases. She is the author of the book Women Building Peace, Why They Do It, What They Do, and Why It Matters. She was appointed to the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in 2020 New Year's Honors List for service to the international peace building and women's rights. And our third speaker is Ms. Niemat Ahmadi. Ms. Ahmadi is the founder and president of the For Women Action Group. It's a U.S. DC-based organization that focuses on the empowerment of communities affected by Darfur genocide. Ms. Ahmadi is a native of North Darfur region of Sudan. She has led the Darfur Women Action Group to bring Darfur genocide affected communities and historically marginalized Sudanese to participate at the center of political decision making and to effectively contribute to sustainable transformation of Sudan. This concludes the speaker's bios, and now I'll just give you a quick outline of the event. So this event will be live streamed on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll be taking your questions in writing, and my colleagues will pass them to me to share them at the end. And now, without any further ado, Ambassador Currie, the floor is yours.
Sorry. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. It's such a pleasure to be here today with you, with the Darfur Women's Action Group, and to be participating in this important discussion. I was so honored a year or so ago to be able to address this group, and it's great to be back with you again. And I particularly want to thank Niemat for everything she's done and recognize the accomplishments that we've all seen over the past year since the last time I was able to speak to this group. And I look forward to being able to have a continued discussion on the remarkable achievements that we've seen from Sudanese women since the revolution, and to recognize and to talk about the challenges that remain ahead, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. As the Darfur Women's Action Group has emphasized, in the midst of crises where state resources are stretched to the limit and societies are under pressure, no society can afford to sideline half its population or ignore the contributions that half of the population can make to resolving crises and to supporting communities that are under stress. This is especially true as we work to implement the Women, Peace and Security agenda in areas of conflict. It's true in women's economic empowerment, and it's true in the context of this COVID pandemic. I actually had a wonderful opportunity last December to visit Sudan. And while I was there, it was actually on the anniversary of one of the important revolutionary anniversaries. And it was so wonderful to see everyone out in the streets, to see the sense of celebration that still buoys people and continues to cause the Sudanese people to keep up their fight for human rights, human dignity, democracy, and the end of abusive Islamist military rule. And so I was really inspired by all of the people I met with. I met with a lot of women from government, from civil society, and from the private sector to learn about their hopes and their concerns during that time. And they talked a lot about the need for legal reforms to make it easier for women to participate in the economy and to go about their business and to get educated and to move from the informal to the formal sector of the economy, to get access to grow their business, access to capital to grow their business. And they talked a lot also about the need for transitional justice that will allow them to pursue accountability for the abuses that were committed under the Bashir regime, including the conflict-related sexual violence that has been at the centerpiece of DWAG's work. We also discussed how the U.S. government can support their work, women meaningful and full participation in transitional justice and peace processes and in the future of the nation. And then shortly after that trip, I was confirmed into this position in the Office of Global Women's Issues, where we are focused on these two pillars of women's economic empowerment, the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda, and what we call our Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative. And these two pillars are really deeply interlinked and mutually reinforcing in terms of the work that we're doing. So we see these as really important tools that we have at our disposal to empower women as agents of change and to help them become the drivers of peace processes and global economic growth and recovery now. And so we are pleased that the United States has such great tools that allow us to continue to be global leaders in advancing women's rights politically, economically, and society-wide. And so these rights and the kinds of initiatives that we're pursuing, the kind of cooperation that we're pursuing with the Sudanese people are going to help bolster the chances of success in Sudan. As you know, it was women's collective leadership, initiative, and courage that helped to bring forth this revolution and created this opportunity for all the people of Sudan to lead a more prosperous, secure, and better life. They helped to overthrow a man who and a regime that had been a scourge on not just Africa, but on across the world as a regime that promoted terrorism and undermined respect for human rights and created chaos and instability across the whole region. And we had implemented policies of sanctions and UN Security Council resolutions and all sorts of tools of what we would normally think of as maybe hard power or and other really tough foreign policy tools that we had used and national security tools that we had used to try to undermine the pernicious influence that this person, that the Bashir regime had. And in the end, it was a peaceful group of citizens of Sudan, including tremendous leadership from women in Sudan, that actually got rid of this guy. And it's such a great and inspiring thing for all of us. And we're often, when we look at these peaceful revolutions and how they work and why they work, we think a lot about how we can, how we support the critical catalysts who are going to help make the change that we all want to see. And so what our office is doing is that we are trying to find those solutions and trying to help figure out how to empower those catalytic individuals and organizations who are going to drive forward peace, security, and prosperity for their people. So through our Women, Peace, and Security agenda, we're doing this through 4 different lines. We're working on policy, diplomacy, partnerships, and programs. And in our plan, we just issued a new Women, Peace, and Security implementation plan for the State Department about a month and a half ago now. And in that plan, we talk about how we're going to do this. And we outline it as we're going to seek and support the preparation and meaningful participation of women around the world in decision-making processes related to conflicts and crisis. We are going to promote the protection of women and girls' human rights, access to humanitarian assistance, and safety from violence, abuse, and exploitation around the world. Strengthen United States international programs to improve outcomes in equality for and the empowerment of women, and encourage our partners in other governments to adopt policies, plans, and capacities to improve the meaningful participation of women in processes connected to peace and security and decision-making institutions. So this is, we are operationalizing this plan across the world. And, for the past 20 years since the passage of UNSCR 1325, and it's a real honor to be on this panel with Ms. Anderlini, who's been so involved in this for the past 3 decades. We really feel that these are the things that we can focus on at a governmental level to help advance this agenda. It's something we've been working on and leading on for 20 years and more, but having both legislation and national action plans and a national strategy behind it is really, really important. And so we are also looking forward to seeing Sudan work on their national action plan. So I think that what we're going to continue in the context of Sudan to advocate for inclusion of women in the transitional government, to ensure that the issues that impact women are receiving the attention they deserve. And we're going to also continue to push for accountability for violence against women, including the sexual violence related to the June 3rd events. Which also means we need to work to support and encourage the National Independent Committee that's investigating and pursuing accountability for the violence on June 3rd, including the alleged extrajudicial killings, torture, and sexual violence against women protesters. And when I was there in December, I personally encouraged the NIC leadership to include women on their team, to adopt gender-sensitive and survivor-centric approaches to their work, and ensure that they were taking all the necessary steps to make it so that the voices and concerns of women were heard, especially on these sensitive and in a culturally conservative place like Sudan. Addressing these issues of sexual violence against women are very, very challenging. And so as I mentioned before, we also have this economic empowerment initiative where we believe that the Women, Peace, and Security and women's economic empowerment efforts need to go hand in hand, and that women's leadership in advancing these goals is obviously critical. So we work with the White House on the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative to increase opportunities for women's full and free participation in the economy. And with Sudan facing such a difficult situation in their economy, they can't afford even before COVID, they couldn't, there's no space for limiting the potential of your population when you're already facing economic difficulties. You need to do more to open up that space and create more potential. And our WGDP initiatives are based on these ideas about how do we help governments, the private sector, and communities bring women off the sidelines and into the economy. And especially now in the in response to the COVID crisis, we really need to do everything we can to make sure that women are available to drive the recovery. And we've seen the important roles that women play as frontline responders to this crisis, and we continue to see women leading, and we need to make sure that government policies and activities and programs that are aimed at relief and resilience in this time are taking account of the needs and the perspectives of women in order to bring them into this into the recovery and give them the ability to drive forward an effective recovery. So we're working with governments to help remove the legal and regulatory and cultural barriers that limit women's ability to participate, including in areas like access to institutions, the ability to build credit and own property, manage property, travel freely, and access employment opportunities. So we've seen some positive changes in this respect in Sudan recently, and we continue to look for more indicators that the Sudanese government and the transitional authority is going to keep making it more possible for women to come off the sidelines and participate at all levels of the economy. And I think that we're really encouraged by some of the steps that have been taken in that respect recently by the Transitional Council. But that doesn't mean that we can stop, even though we do have a lot of changes underway in Sudan and things that seem like they are pushing the country in a better direction. And we're encouraged by the fact that there are women in high-level positions in the government, and that Prime Minister Hamdok has repeatedly spoken out about the need to empower women and have them fully participate. We know that that Sudanese women, however, are concerned that the issues that impact them the most have not been prioritized. So we do want to make sure that even as we see progress, we're not sitting on our laurels and sitting back and waiting. And I know that the women on this call, I know would never do that. So, but we do want to make sure that we are continuing, and we're continuing to do this in our bilateral engagement with the Sudanese authorities to hold them to commitments that they have made about inclusion of women in key institutions. And where they're falling short, we continue to try to support them to meet those objectives. And that includes not just in Khartoum, but also in Darfur, in the two areas, in other places where things may be better in Khartoum, but they're lagging in the rest of the country. And we need to make sure that it's not just in the Transitional Leadership Council and other bodies in Khartoum, but that we are having this effect across Sudan, and especially in conflict areas. It's particularly important there, and that we are doing what we can to increase the representation of women in the decision-making process that affect their lives and communities. And with WPS, with the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and the COVID crisis intersecting in Sudan, this is particularly critical. So we really are listening to the voices of women in the government, in civil society, in the private sector, and looking for opportunities to engage more with them. I know our embassy in Khartoum has done a great job of creating safe spaces for women to come together, and has done a lot of work to encourage that. We're in our office looking for additional opportunities to use programs, as I mentioned before, to effectively support the rule of law and other participation that can help encourage women to be part of the processes that are going to help Sudan move forward. That said, as we're continuing to also deal with ongoing violence in Darfur, including violence against women and violence involving militias and security forces and armed movements, we're really worried about recent upticks in violence and what we've seen there. And a sense of lawlessness, I would say, that's emerging in Darfur, and we continue to support the mandate of UNAMID and the transition to the political mission, but we are really working hard to make sure that the protection of civilians aspect remains very robust in that particular mandate, whatever it looks like as it continues to evolve. We are within the Security Council advocating very strongly for that as well. And we also continue to advocate that as the peace process moves forward, that the participation of women, and including and particularly IDP women, that it's imperative that they have a strong voice in these efforts to secure the country and bring peace to it. and resolve these longstanding issues and disputes. So while we've seen that the pandemic has certainly increased the risk of violence in some places, it has been encouraging to see these legal reforms that I was mentioning before, and I want to highlight a couple, especially the criminalization of female genital mutilation and cutting, which tends to, when you're in a crisis situation, things like FGMC and early and child forced marriage tend to increase in crisis and conflict situations. So having new legal tools that allow us to combat that, these horrible abuses of women are really important. And then we've also seen some steps to remove restrictions on women's ability to travel, which are positive, but we need to continue to push on these things. It's a challenge, especially in COVID, as it's made it very difficult for us to access vulnerable populations, especially outside of Khartoum. I think we can also say that COVID has impacted our ability to do some of the monitoring and evaluation and support work that we would normally do to ensure that our assistance and our programs are reaching the intended beneficiaries. And we know, for instance, in Sudan, that women are less likely to have mobile phones or internet access. And so this digital divide issue is a real problem when we're not able to see people in person or go to their homes and visit with them, and instead are having to rely on technologies that women don't have equal access to. So this is one that we're very conscious of as well, and working through how we adapt our interventions and our engagements to make sure that we're not missing those voices. But that's a real challenge for us right now in terms of across the board on whether it's COVID response, women, peace and security, other economic engagement and political engagement. But I just, when I think about Sudan, I have so much hope right now, even as things seem very difficult and the economy is so challenged and the politics seem very challenged, and the COVID crisis has only added another degree of difficulty to it. But whenever I think about Awadia Kuku, our tea lady who all of us know and admire so much, and how she went from being a widow with no resources, selling tea and having a tea stall on the streets of Khartoum, and formed a union of the other tea ladies to help them find their voice and be able to advocate for themselves and push and fight against police violence against them and the harassment that they faced. And then how, she was arrested and spent 4 years in jail for trying to just have a livelihood and protect her sisters who were trying to do the same. And then when I was in Darfur in December, when I was in Sudan in Khartoum in December, and I saw her, and we were sitting there, and she had driven to the DCM's house in her own car that she had been able to purchase as a result of her receiving the award from the State Department of the International Women of Courage Award in 2016, which allowed her to buy a car, which allowed her to do her work more efficiently and organize the tea ladies more efficiently. And as I was sitting with her and a group of other women activists, it was so interesting to me because for those of you who've worked in Sudan, you know how the tea ladies were for many years just considered at the bottom of society in Khartoum and just almost invisible people. And she has changed that substantially. And the role that the tea ladies played in helping to protect the young activists during the revolution, the intelligence networks that they set up, all of the remarkable things that they did. It was interesting to sit there with some of the younger generation of activists, most of whom were students, well-educated, from good families, and who they were never really going to kind of have to face the same struggles that Awadia had faced in her life, certainly. But to see how they treated her with such respect and looked to her and you know, and called her ama and auntie, and really knowing that these women who have been through so much and that they are so committed to one another. And I felt a real bond of sisterhood across generations and across, you know, social class divides, that you really, when you see that, it gives you a lot of hope for the future of the country to know that this is going on there. So I want to end with that very inspiring note of how the women in this country are continuing to amaze me with their resilience and their ability to come together and work and confront the challenges they face. And as much as we still have to do, and in Sudan, as much as there is still to do, we're fortunate to be able to stand by these remarkable women and support them as they go about their work. So I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ambassador Currie, for sharing the State Department's take on women's issue globally and in Sudan as well. And thank you for the shout out and recognizing our beloved Dawabiya Mahmoud Kuku. She is an exceptional lady. She is our icon, and we all look up to her. She just represents everything that Sudanese women are: the tenacity, their perseverance, the strength, the courage, the pride. She is all that. I'm looking forward to the discussion because this could not have come in any more timely time now that Sudan is already starting to appoint some new people to the offices and all that. We already lost a minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and now we're down with one woman, and also we're struggling to have more women in the cabinet and also in other legislative and government body. So I'm going to look forward to that part of the discussion. I'm sure anyone who watches Sudan will have tons of discussion. And now we're going to move on to Ms. Sanam. First, I have to say that I'm very honored to be ever in one space with you, Ms. Sanam. You are an idol for me, and I really appreciate that. So the floor is yours. And with no further ado, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you as well. And I'm sorry that Senator Jaffer couldn't join today's event because of a family emergency. As I was listening to Ambassador Currie, I was thinking about my visit to Sudan back in September last year. I was there with the UN, and we were there to look at the question of what was happening with the transition and what was the UN's role in supporting the transition process. And specifically, I was part of the team to look at the question of gender and inclusion and address these things. And in a way, the Sudan story encapsulates exactly why the agenda that we have, the WPS agenda that we have, was relevant 20 years ago and was prescient and relevant to today and where we are right now. And as I say, the Sudan, kind of what a few of the things that I saw and we discussed in Sudan really capture the issue. So the first thing, this resolution came about when we were seeing the end of the Cold War, we were seeing internal conflicts, and we were seeing how the international system that we have, the international peace and security architecture that we have, is not really set to deal with internal conflicts. You know, we can condemn things, but actually, unless a government invites you in, the Security Council can't step in, right? So that's always been the problem since we've had internal conflicts become the dominant types of conflicts that we have. So in the case of Sudan, and what happened 20 years ago was that women were saying, we want to be able to prevent violence, right? So we're not saying that the conflict itself should be prevented, because when we say conflict prevention, dictators will turn around and say, yes, we arrest everybody and put them in jail, and that's conflict prevention. That's happening in Turkey, it's happening in Egypt, it's happening in lots of countries right now, unfortunately, right? So it's not about the prevention of conflict, it's about how do we resolve, how do we acknowledge it, how do we resolve it non-violently. The fact that Sudanese women were at the forefront of the revolution that you had is extraordinary. It was so powerful for us around the world to see. I'm Iranian by background, and Iranian women have been at the forefront of nonviolent change in Iran as well. And to be able to see that force and that power and the symbolism of peace that was there, and of this, the fundamental issue of saying, we need to change, but we're not going to do it by behaving as you behave towards us, right? So the oppressed is not going to become the oppressor. This was a really powerful message, and it comes from women. And it's inherent to the messaging of 1325. The second thing, of course, is the question of participation, that women were saying 20 years ago, as they do now, we need to be at the tables where decisions are being made that not only affect our lives and the future that we have, but decisions about issues that we have lots of solutions to, that our presence can make a difference in how we address those problems. 20 years ago, it was Northern Irish women, Catholics and Protestants who were working together behind the scenes and at the peace table. It was Israeli and Palestinian women who were doing this. 20 years later, it's Sudanese, it's Yemeni, it's Syrians, it's Libyans. It's the same story. It's Afghans, always Afghans. And yet, we are still refusing to have them recognized as independent delegates to the peace table. And I'll come to that point in a minute. But Sudan, again, is really important. And it was notable for me that in the draft constitution and the national documents that had emerged, implementation of 1325 was mentioned as an issue that the Sudanese transitional government was owning and wanted to undertake. And so one of my questions when I was there was that we, as under the umbrella of the international community and the UN, I was saying the international community has a duty and an obligation to support this. This is not about, culturally things are not okay. No, culturally they've already put it into the political discourse, and it's part of the commitments that the national government has made. So we can't, as outsiders, come and say, oh, I'm sorry, Sudanese women, this is against your culture. Sudanese women have already proven that's not quite true, right? So it's that question of obligation and what's the international community coming to do. But that participation piece is so important. The third area is, again, related to these things, which is that so often when I have dealt with my UN colleagues and especially the head of the peacekeeping unit in Darfur a couple of years ago, we were at a seminar together, and the issue, and he was talking about his own experience of going in Darfur, talking to women about why it is that they go out to collect firewood and risk being raped by the Janjaweed or by other militias. And he said these women turned around to me and looked at me and very frankly said to me, well, if we go, we risk being raped. If the men go, they risk being killed. So we will do this, right? So this, again, is, what does it tell you? It's about the leadership of women. It's about the power that they have. It's their willingness to protect their own communities as they put themselves at risk. So it's about sexual violence, but it's also, again, it's about the inherent leadership that women are displaying in these contexts. And these are all, this is, what we hear in Sudan, this is not just relevant to Sudan. I was in Nepal in 2009, same story. You go back to Liberia, early 2000s, same story. Women were constantly hiding the men and the boys from the onslaught of the armed actors because it's not acceptable to beat up women as they stand in front of you. Right now in Portland, here in the US, it's mothers who are at the forefront of the protests and trying to push back the violence of the police. So this is a universal thing that we see, and it's inherent to our agenda, and it's inherent to what's going on in Sudan. And I think these are, again, shows you the prescience. Then COVID came along. I run a network of women's peace organizations in 40 countries. Since mid-March, every week we have a call-in with them from all over the world. And from the beginning, from Basra to Yemen to Colombia to Cameroon, the first thing that we heard was that these women were saying they were already out in their communities talking about hygiene, talking about PPE, talking about masks. When the WHO came out and said, wash your hands with soap and water, our partners in Yemen and Syria and in the IDP areas and in Cameroon were saying, but we don't have either soap or water. And what did they start doing? They started, through our WhatsApp group, they started talking about how to make soap, how to do hand sanitizers using alcohol, aloe vera, and so forth. In Yemen, our partners are actually fixing water pumps to enable people to have access to water. Women are taking the lead. They are first responders. They are essential workers, right? And we're seeing this over and over again. Niemat, you and I had this conversation yesterday about Sudan. Same story in Sudan. COVID comes and it's women who are the first responders. When food insecurity comes, it's food bags. From Albania to Afghanistan, our partners have been saying, it's Ramadan, we have to give food. And so they're preparing food bags and working with local businesses to collect money and resources. In Liberia, our partners who had dealt with Ebola and are now dealing with COVID said, in the food bags, we also added sanitary pads because women need that, and we know this, right? Then came, as they were doing this work, came all the news about violence against women. In Iraq, we're hearing that the remnants of ISIS and all these years of violence and so forth, there's killings of women, there's burnings of women, there's sexual abuse. These kinds of things are happening. Who's dealing with it? Again, it's women on the ground that are doing it. It's not the police. It's not the authorities. If the authorities and the police get involved, it's because the women are getting them involved. So here we are. We have this unbelievable kind of, what I see, a juxtaposition and a dichotomy between those who have power, the Security Council, governments that we look to, local officials in all our countries that we have. They have the power to make a difference, to provide the services, to be responsible for their communities. And yet they're there and they're not there. They are present, but they are absent when they're needed most. And at the same time, we have the least powerful people who have neither weapons nor money nor access to the elite taking on the burden of responsibility. Everywhere we look, this is what's happening, and it is systematically, it's women who are doing this all over the world. And this brings us to our agenda. 20 years ago, we went to the Security Council saying, you need our help to resolve these problems. We are here, work with us. 20 years later, I'm still saying that, and the Security Council, I'm afraid to say, and the UN, and with all of the incremental things that we've seen happen, they are not doing their part well enough. And I can't tell you how angry this makes me, because we're talking about life and death, and we're talking about moments of opportunity that they come and they go. If Sudan doesn't have its representative women in its political processes right now, and if the international community doesn't insist on it and say, this is the condition for our help, it's going to go, and we're going to be back to square one. And the square one is not just that it's going to be bad for those women, because so often they think you're just doing it for yourself. It's going to be bad for the country. It's going to be bad for, if this is not transformation, it's just one elite coming up on top of another, right? So the international community has to live up to its responsibilities. And what I've seen over and over is that we are suffering from a syndrome, what I call the AAA syndrome, of ad hocery, apathy, and amnesia. We do great stuff. There's some amazing work that gets done, but a person comes, a person goes. You get one political officer who's super into it, and they disappear. An envoy who's great, but his political director is not. They don't care, and they're not held accountable. And it's come to a point where we need our governments, whether they're working bilaterally or through our multilateral institutions, to hold their own institutions accountable. It's not okay. If it was diplomats and technocrats stealing money, they would be thrown out. So why is it okay that they are stealing the future of the women and children of, whether it's Sudan or Yemen or Syria or elsewhere? Because that's what they're doing. They're that one little moment where, and we're not saying that women alone can solve everything. What we're saying is that by having women who have taken on the mantle of responsibility to protect, the responsibility to protect agenda sits with women right now. By having these women at the table, they will bring the voice of community. They will bring the consciousness of community. They will bring the moral authority that the political actors often don't have, right? And it's our job to make them, to enable them to be there, so that we take it one step further along the process. And this is, I would love to be able to end on a positive note. My positive note is that the resilience exists. The women are all over the place. If you ever hear that this is about culture, push it away, because if it was culture, it would look different in Sudan than it does in Colombia or in Yemen, and it looks the same. It's about power. It's all about power. And I think that what we see with women is that we turn it around and we say, you know what, power is not binary. Power isn't if I have it, you lose it. Power can be like love. Power can be I'm powerful and you're powerful, and together we're going to take it to the next level. And this is where we need to go, because I think the COVID the COVID experience is showing all of us we're interconnected, we need each other, and everybody's job and role matters where they are. The local is incredibly important when the international can't get there. The international is incredibly important when the local is when it has impact on the local. So the interconnectedness is there. The agenda is important, and what I would just say is, this is our moment to say we stand with women peace builders, and if there's one commitment that we're going to make from today onwards, is that women peace builders should be at every peace table and every space where decisions are being made as their own independent delegations to have their own voice in the processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sanam. As usual, you just put it right there. You come, like, whatever you said, it was just like exactly what's happening in Sudan, especially when it comes to the culture, how they're trying to sideline women and telling that, oh, some communities will not accept women as leaders, while this is not the truth. And they're bringing all these like weak exercises and weak excuses to exclude women. But as you said, I think having a more inclusive outlook to peace, including women specifically, it will only further the peace and the country as a whole, not just women's agenda, because women's agenda is everybody's agenda, actually. They're very inclusive when it comes to their prosperity and aspects, how they see governance and all. Thank you so much. Now we're going to move, last but not least, Ms. Niemat Ahmadi, and then after that we'll be opening it. I know a lot of people are like sitting at the edge of this seat. They want to have questions, but we have one more speaker. It's going to be Ms. Niemat Ahmadi. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Azaz, and thank you, our two speakers, Sanam and Ambassador Currie. I'm very pleased and delighted to be among you as two remarkable women who have been doing outstanding effort to make changes everywhere in the world. And there has never been a better time to work with you and be with you and ally ourselves with you to speak about this important issue. When it comes to women's peace and security agenda and the women impact, the impact of COVID-19, I will start by speaking to women peace and security agenda, and then I will dive into the impact of COVID-19 on women. Today, looking at the world, around the globe, women's participation has remarkably improved. But however, there are so many challenges that we need to address and to understand and address thoroughly before we can have adequate and effective participation of women. And looking at Sudan as an example, women for years, Sudanese women have played a remarkable role in shaping the past, the present, and also will absolutely contribute to the shaping of the future of Sudan. However, challenges are very daunting for Sudanese women to be recognized and to have an equal seat in the table when it comes to the decision of peace and security and improving the livelihood of the Sudanese population. Taking example of when speaking about the situation for women in Sudan and the status of women in general, there are so many layers of factors that are contributing to discrimination, undermining, and exclusion of women from participating in the decision making. But when you look at the society at large, you see that without women, nothing in Sudan can be done today. And experience shows that looking at the situation in Darfur, for the last 18 years, women have been subject to the most brutal kind of attack. The former regime of al-Bashir has used rape systematically and as a deliberate policy of the state against its own people, and knowing that women in Darfur representing the center of the society and center of the family. And we have a famous saying that says, a woman has no enemy before. Unfortunately, this is no longer the case. Today in Darfur, women turn from being the most secure to the most vulnerable because of that culture of promotion of violence against women and the immunity that associated with it, because it has become a state policy. And so that throughout the year, women have been subjected to not only the direct harm as a result of targeting them and attacking them, but also the psychological and the social stigma that associated with rape, but also the harm that they have experienced from attack on their communities, uprooting them from the place of origin, forcing them to live in a desert area whereby there's no resources, but also there's no enough shelter for women and there's no privacy. Living in the internally displaced camp as of today, women have lived in the internally displaced camp in Darfur for 18 years, in South Kordofan and the Nubu Mountain for the last 8 years. Or 9 years since 2011, when President al-Bashir has violated the comprehensive peace agreement and start attacking. And in Darfur, women represent the overwhelming majority of those who live in the internally displaced and refugees camps. 80 to 85% are women and children. So you can imagine, as Ms. Sanam mentioned in her speaking, that in many instances, women know that they are facing that risk, and they go out to face the risk to protect their societies. And even though women have been the most impacted, they have been the least involved in the process of achieving peace to Darfur. And those actors and stakeholders working on pursuing peace or finding solution to Darfur have not prioritized participation of women. And despite being the most targeted and the most affected, women have demonstrated an outstanding resilience and courage. As for example, in Darfur, women during these years of suffering and systematic attack against them, they have not sat idly by and waited for someone else to come and hold them to try to resolve their problem, but they themselves allied themselves together, and they have emerged as strong leaders at the grassroots level and have shown the world that they are capable of leading and helping their community to come out of this crisis that they continue to live in. Women serve as healers and taking care of their families, taking care of the children of their neighbors, their relatives in the society, those orphans who lost their families, and taking care of their children. Women are going out to look for firewood, looking for water, and looking for other income generating activities so that they can help their families survive throughout all of this crisis, whereby systematic attack and repeatedly continued. As of today, sexual violence continue to be like everywhere present as I speak to you today, and women are still persistently standing up for themselves and speaking. Women also serve as a spokesperson for their communities, whereby they speak out and they condemn the act of violence, and they also report incidents and speak with international delegates and local authorities when it comes to escalation of violence within the conflict setting. And living in the internally displaced camp for the last 18 years and persistently showing that they can keep their community together, I think women are capable of making all decisions and capable of leading the society. Unfortunately, women's strength and resilience and these qualities have not been utilized, and that's why we at that For Women Action Group is specifically like our core priority is women empowerment and investing in those qualities that have been demonstrated by women over these years. Women in South Kordofan, they are living in cave, but they also are working really hard, not only to provide survival means for their communities, but also to speak and to develop their agendas for change in Sudan. And when it comes to overall situation for women in Sudan, there are so many factors that contributed to undermining and discrimination against women, including this state-sponsored violence or state-sponsored violence against women that they use rape as a weapon of war. It's a form of power struggle that the government in the center has used this against women, but also within the center and within other regions where the conflict is not present, there are so many other discriminatory laws and norms that have been used against women, including there are cultural norms that are fading out right now due to persistence of women, and also due to society has recognized the importance of women's participation and women's role in the society, not because they were allowed the space, but they have persistently showed that they are capable of grabbing the space and showing up and working hand in hand with everyone that's trying to resolve the crisis in Sudan. So the additional to these factors, there are institutional practice like Sharia laws that the former regime has used to undermine women. And within Sudan, within other areas, while rape was used against women to undermine women and to destroy the social fabric of the Sudanese women in Darfur, flogging of women in the capital Khartoum in front of the eyes of the all international community has been systematically used for the simplest things, such as women choosing what to wear. If you are wearing a pants, you are considered that women are violating the decency or the decent wear of the public decency. They violated the public decency, and then you can find the most qualified women who are professors, women who are civil society leaders, have been beaten by a security or a police man who is not anywhere closer to her qualification, because simply this person is a state representative, and also have the authority from the state to abuse women, and they have the backing of the state. And that is why, like, even though Sudanese women have achieved a lot of gain, the same as other women around the world, that regime of Omar al-Bashir over the last 30 years have severely restricted women's freedoms and hugely undermined women's ability to participate and to effectively contribute to changing and improving the situation for women and advance the cause of gender equality in Sudan at large. Looking into the most recent development in Sudan has brought a lot of hope, not only for women, but for the entire Sudanese society, and also around the globe. People have seen and recognized the strength and the leadership of the Sudanese women. Women have been in the forefront, organizing, providing food, providing health care and assistance for protesters, and marching, picking up the tear gas and throwing back into the police, not to be violent, but to show them that they are determined and that change is the only option, and that this change must be led by women. And that was amazing to see that the whole world have recognized the strength and the resilience and the leadership of the Sudanese women. And we were so happy and optimistic that now we have an interim government in place, and that finally Sudanese women's effort will be recognized, and that their voices and their leadership will be integrated into the processes of the interim processes or the transitional processes, whereby women can be allowed to set the foundation for democratic transformation of Sudan and sustainable peace. Unfortunately, this is not the case. When the interim government, even when they signed the Constitution Declaration, there was a mention to the 1325, there was a mention to women's effective participation. In reality, this was only in paper. Right now, before the dismissal of the Sudanese foreign minister, women's participation was only 12%. Are you kidding me? Are you telling here the world, like the interim government of Sudan, telling the world that Sudanese women are not capable? And they say, well, we choose people based on qualification. 25 years ago, I never thought that today I will sit and speak about women's participation. And I went to Afat University. This is an all-women university, whereby not only the students that every year graduated in thousands and go to civil servant and go to international NGOs and go to the academic institution, but also the women professors, women civil society leaders, women who are the most qualified among the Sudanese, let alone women who have been graduated from the thousands of other Sudanese universities, and they have been actively working within various sectors to improve the life of the Sudanese people. That today, when you come to select people who may be qualified to serve in government, you are talking about that women are there are not enough women qualified to serve in government. That's like really not the way that the interim, and that's very disappointing to us to see that today the interim government of Sudan has not effectively integrated women's participation, prioritized women's participation, but also integrated women's voices of women's priority agendas to their interim processes. Because this has also a lot of our other underlying causes, because not only the transitional government, but also the international community, we are very good at, when you look at the UN resolutions and the way the international community operates, they are very good at responding to situation and issue resolutions. But these resolutions are without setting measures for effective implementation of this resolution. Then this resolution will only be a beautiful, nice document that is written in paper without going on. Speaking about women, peace, and security and 1325, 1325 is a great instrument if it is implemented. And I also would like to recognize that so many other countries who have implemented 1325, they have developed their national action plan and implemented it. But in the case of Sudan and many other countries, the United Nations inviting countries to adopt and to implement 1325. And when it comes to the state, governments are never been willing to implement 1325 because it allows the space for women to take a part. And that seems kind of like a power struggle for them and also a threat to them. As Ms. Anderlini eloquently articulated, women are not a threat to everyone. If a woman is not a threat to your family, women are the center of our families. They are not a threat to your society. They won't be a threat to your government position. They will be complementing your role, and they are supposed to be equally partner in change making, not to be treated as a threat. So 1325 is a great document, as I said, but it does not trickle down. It's yes, we can have a great national action plan, but without effective effort to implement 1325 and to make it, because otherwise everything is come at like kind of like a top-down approach. But what we are looking for in order to have effective and adequate participation of women, we have to look into how to bridge the gap between women at the grassroots level and women, civil society at the center, but also between women and the government institutions, and in ensuring that participation of women is prioritized. When it comes to Sudan, we have a lot of issues that are affecting women, and particularly with a special emphasis on women in conflict. We have a strong civil society group who are very powerful and they can be able to speak, but also we have the new emerging grassroots leaders within the conflict affected areas. And sometimes actually there is a huge gap between these two women agencies. And in order for us to ensure that women can make that change and be able to take their seat in the table in Sudan, we have to make an effort to bridge the gap, to bring all of these women together to have a unified voice and unified women's agenda across the Sudan. And also, as I reference to, in reference to 1325 to be effective, it has to be domesticated. It has to be domesticated that by making an effort to bring it down to people at the grassroots level, translate it into different local languages so that people at the grassroots level understand. Because when it comes to Sudan, I believe in the power of people, and everyone will agree with me, as we have seen how women and young people came out and changed 30 years of dictatorship that has challenged the the whole world and telling the Sudanese people, but women and youth are able to show the world that Sudanese people are capable of changing the dictator and that they can change in reality for themselves. Right? So if people have the knowledge, if people have ability to utilize these tools, they will definitely use it to hold their own government accountable and they hold their own leaders accountable. And the only change can happen, and these resolutions and instruments can be effective when women at local level and regional level and national level are allied and effectively engaged with various actors and be able to hold them accountable. And they are also allowed the space to express themselves and also to articulate their issues and articulate their agendas and participate in the process of the decision making. Another opportunity, also there are multilateral institutions and also there are bilateral effort that has been going on. I think with reference to what the international community can do to ensure that in the case of Sudan, that Sudanese women are empowered and allowed the space to participate in government. As of now, the interim government of Sudan is in desperate need for support from the international community. And recently there was a donor conference that was hosted in Berlin by Germany, whereby so many countries, including the United States, have pledged to support the Sudan. So this is a great opportunity that all the support that has been pledged must be conditioned by seeing a clear, effective improvement and equal participation of women in the decision making. Otherwise, that funding will go into the hands of the political leaders and the military that we have right now. The government in Sudan is led by the military. And our fear is that this money will be manipulated and will be also channeled into military institutions, the same as what had happened with President Bashir. And in other sectors like women's priorities and other, they will suffer a great deal if the international community has not conditioned its support to Sudan to be contingent to improvement and adequate participation of women in the government and also in decision making at the highest level. And this week, people were talking about appointing, in the beginning when we raised a concern about women's participation within the cabinet of ministers and the sovereign council, they were trying to justify and making all the excuses. And then people also said, well, now there are state governors appointments, and every state they put forward a suggestion to have more women in government by appointing women governors. And again, the interim government came back and said, well, the society, because of cultural norms, they refuse that they are not ready for women. And that's not true. I totally disagree with them. And that is where accountability has to take place. I think the international community and I think the United States, as they are working to improve efforts, of course, Sudan needs support from the international community, but not without condition, not without accountability, not without measures. And those measures, women's participation has to be the number one measure. Also ending violence against women and combating violence and including laws that are favorable to women by also encouraging Sudan to adopt all the international human rights norms that are favorable to women and the advancement of gender equality. So without that effort, it will be really hard to see changes happen in Sudan. And also for the Sudanese women, they have to ally themselves together. Women in the center, women civil society group, women have to work. It is easy to gather Sudanese civil society within the center in Khartoum and have them talk about women issues. And this has been done repeatedly, including during the time of Bashir. But it's failed to integrate the voices of women within the conflict-affected areas. And that is why if we cannot integrate the voices of women affected in the conflict-affected areas to the national agenda, we will not have peace in Sudan. And if we don't have peace in Sudan, we will not have transformation in Sudan. And that means the interim period will fail. And we all do not want to sit and see that fail, but also our international allies and stakeholders do not want that to happen. And that's why this conversation here today is very important, and that we hope to continue this conversation and make our recommendation and making it clear for the international community that there is a need to hold Sudan accountable. And also to Sudanese women that they must work hand in hand with women at the grassroots level. And when it comes to women empowerment, empowerment has to go beyond the small enterprise, as the effort has been like internationally has been very traditional in terms of empowering women. As of now, as Ambassador Kelley mentioned, that one of the barriers to women economic empowerment is not money and education only, but it's also lack of access to means of communication and lack of access to information, lack of access to internet. Today, when you go in Darfur and in these other areas, women do not have a smartphone, and that has come to women have always compromised for the interest of their families. Most men have a smartphone, and most men have access to internet. That's also coming into, we have to integrate these priorities into our agendas within the context of women empowerment, and make sure that these priorities are integrated, that we have to move from the traditional ways of responding to women issues. With respect to the impact of COVID-19 in women, I would like to recognize, and we all must acknowledge, that COVID-19 has not only impacted women, it has impacted every single member of our society, globally, at home and internationally. And however, the impact of COVID-19 on women may be beyond our imagination, because COVID-19 has exposed the existing inequalities that exist in our society, and that including lack of equality for women, but also lack of access. And in addition, as Ms. Sanam mentioned, that most women are the frontline workers, women are essential workers, but also if there is one person impacted by COVID-19 in the household, the mother or the wife or the sister will be the first person who will be impacted by that. They have either take the lead and go out and seek support for their families. They also will be connected to everyone in the society, but also to our connected to also responsible of providing and taking care of the well-being of the family as well. So within that context, even though COVID-19 is impacting everyone in our society, we have to be vigilant, and we have to be considered into taking into consideration women's participation when it comes to emergency response, strategizing for emergency response, and also the impact of COVID-19 is not going to be just the immediate economic or social impact on women. The impact is going to be beyond what we are talking about currently, and the consequences on women, it will continue to grow, and things that we need to actively identify areas of concerns, and also actively integrate those areas and priorities of women to the agendas of our government and our institutions at national and international level. In Sudan, when it comes to the response to COVID-19, of course, the country is fragile. There is economic crisis. There is lack of health infrastructure, but the government did its best to provide information. But also, they have not integrated women's voices in their responses, and particularly women within the conflict-affected population, whereby women are the overwhelming majority of those who are living in the internally displaced camp. Women are the overwhelming majority of those who lead in civil society groups and CBOs and NGOs, but they have not been exact. But women have not sat by and said, well, we have not been invited. They immediately took their initiative, and they were proactively organizing and start spreading information and coming together, making masks and distributing the personal protective equipment to the vulnerable in their societies, and identifying ways to help the community, but also to help each other. So it is All of this effort is a testament that women are capable, they are proactive, and their participation is not only going to benefit women, but it's benefiting our society at large. And when it comes to Sudan, Sudan is in a very unique situation. It is at the status of make it or break it. And in order for the Sudanese leaders to understand how important it is to integrate voices of women, to allow effective and adequate women participation in decision making, they have to make it now or never. Because when many peace agreements and many efforts around the world have been successful, we have seen examples because of women's effective participation. And many peace agreements and many transformation and post-conflict situations have been persistent because of lack of women participation. You can compare between Iraq and Liberia and Rwanda. In Liberia, we only have had peace being implemented and sustained when women are recognized and given the opportunity, and also the accountability for our child care has opened the way for the first women president to be elected. And in Rwanda, Rwanda is achieving remarkable progress because of the number of women in the parliament, but also in other executive branches. And Sudan is not an exception. And there is also a great example of in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, whereby women, civil society group, and women in the political parties, they allied themselves and they swore that every single individual must prioritize women's agenda within their own parties, and the number one agenda for them not supposed to be their party, but women's agenda supposed to be number one, and then their party's agenda to be number two. And that way they were obligated their parties to advance women's agenda. So today, if you go to Iraq, you will see a huge difference in terms of women participation between Baghdad and between the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And that is exactly the example that we would love to see happen in the Sudan, and within for the interim government to learn from those kind of experience, but also for the Sudanese women to learn from their counterpart, and to be effective in empowering women and ensure that women have a voice in all the processes that Sudanese women need to have strong allies beyond the Sudan's border, to be able to economically empower and to receive capacity building, but also to have strong voices that will hold the government, the interim government in Sudan, accountable for integrating and allowing more space for women to participate. Thank you. I will stop here and will be more than happy to receive your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Niemat. I'm waiting for the questions to come, but I can take the prerogative of being the moderator. And just like piggy off what you said, Ms. Niemat, about how we can make sure that the approach from the policy perspective is actually translated on the ground in terms of effective participation of women, because there are many mechanisms, there are many initiatives, and there's a lot of concern about women being at the table, but it has become a habit for the decision makers to ignore that and come back with some excuses, and they are getting away with it. They are getting away with it a lot. And now, as we see the new governors for Sudan, out of the 18, there were only 2 women, and even that was very done in a shy way, and we're not sure if it's going to hold water. So the question is, all of you, how do you think we can close the gap between the aspiration and the policy and the reality on the ground? You mentioned accountability and holding them accountable, but let's break that down. And what does that mean, and how we can hold them accountable through budgeting, development budgeting, political stance? What is the best way to ensure that and make sure that it's something sustainable and it's a long-lasting, not just cosmetic change or tokenism of using 2 or 3 women just to look progressive, and then the status quo remains and carries on? Thank you. Either one of you can. I think Ambassador Kelley Currie will be leaving soon, so you may start with the answer, and then we'll go in the same order.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'd be fine with that. I think did I unmute myself? I'm a little frozen too.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So I think, first of all, this has been such a rich discussion, and I am sorry that I do have to leave a little bit before it's over. But I really do think that we do have some tools to use, and I take on board the recommendations about donor assistance and support. But I think that, more than that, I think we've got to really question a lot of the assumptions, and we've got to interrogate some of the things that we do. Like, it amazes me how we always end up looking to the very people who created problems of insecurity and terror and violence and put them in charge of the solutions and trying to solve those problems that they themselves created. And so I don't really I don't know how we get around that particular challenge, because it's so at the root of where we often find ourselves. And I really thought that the comment from Sanam about this is about power is exactly right. And this sense that if we give power to a woman, then it's one less place for a man, instead of seeing power as an expanding thing. And so I do think that as partners of the Sudanese government, we need to be more conscious of the choices that we're making about who we engage with, and that we also need to not just continue to fall into patterns that reinforce existing that got us into the problems in the first place by allowing people to be power holders and decision makers after they've done tremendous damage and harm to the society. And unfortunately with that, I'm going to listen to the rest of the speakers, but I am going to have to sign off. And I did want to say again how honored I am to be on this call with this particular group, but I'm going to listen to the rest of the responses here.
Thank you, Ambassador Currie. It was a pleasure and honor to have you. Really appreciate that. And thank you. And you raised a very important point about having the same perpetrators of the atrocities or of the injustices to be in the place of power. And we have a saying in Sudan that those who have the pen will not write their misery. So definitely they're not going to be empowering people who could challenge their power. So Ms. Sanam, maybe you can take it from here about how we can shrink the gap between policies and the top down, and how we can make it to create this momentum that these things are more long lasting, and it's beyond the rhetoric of, oh, we need women. Yes, we do need women. How we can get to that point where we have enough women.
I think they're different. Again, it's kind of both. There's a conceptual level and imagining things differently. And then there's the really practical stuff of how you get it done, right? So on the one hand, for example, if you think about the language, the semantics that we use, and this again, when I work with my UN colleagues, I always say to them, they always talk about the language of power sharing, right? And I say to them, you're working in countries where in Somalia, it was famine, in Sudan, all these problems. Frame it as responsibility sharing, first of all, right? So if you want to be governor, what are you going to do about the water, about the food, about the sexual violence, about the security? Really, the accountability is not just about whether they have women or not. It's really about how are you being responsive to the needs of people, right? And we're going to measure you, or the measure is going to be around that. And this brings it to the international community. One of the things that we as the international community do is the tools that we have. We'll use sanctions, for example. Right? Sanctions can work in some places, but in some places, again, in the context of, say, Iran, I can tell you, the sanctions we've imposed have emboldened and empowered the worst elements in the regime, right? And they've enabled a kleptocratic element to emerge because they're doing black market stuff, right? It's the same with Sudan. We have to look at it and say, what did the sanctions do? How do we now address them? And what mechanisms do we need to look at to make sure that we are doing the right thing by the people for the people of Sudan? And this, and then it goes to my third point, which is that, very often we start with these problems and it's like, okay, we just need to get to the transition, and they're fighting for the next step and the next step. The reality is that the conversation I think we need to be having, whether it's with Sudanese or whether it's with Afghans, is to say, this is your country. You have a moment you have an opportunity as a generation to take it in a positive direction, right? It's an unbelievable privilege to be sitting at that juncture in your country's future where you can either take it towards real betterment for people, or you can take it down more destruction. And the international community is here to help and enable getting it in the right place. But you and we all know that, the attention span also disappears. That today it's Sudan, there's lots of money, then tomorrow it's going to be Syria, the next day it's going to be Yemen. So putting the onus back on the leadership to say, at the moment we're here, what is the right thing to do? What's the vision of Sudan that we want in 2 years or 3 years, and what don't you want? I mean, literally draw it out and say, okay, if you want to get for your children, if you want to get to them so that they can go to school and they can be safe and so forth, what's it going to take, and who do we need to have involved, and how do you make sure that it's inclusive? And if you don't want it to get violent, then what's that going to take? And really humanize it based on the people they care about. And one of the most important things here also is that so often the premise of international involvement and negotiations and stuff is that, there are different sides, and our sides, when they start to hurt, they'll come and they'll negotiate and they compromise. If you have leadership in a country that has the passports of 5 different countries in their pockets, that their children and their assets are sitting abroad, and they themselves are not hurting, right? They're not hurting, but they have power. And if things go wrong, they can leave. That's a problem. That's not okay. Either those people give up their passports and just are Sudanese, and they have to, live and work and have their assets in that country, or they don't get to be in power. But you can't be in power in a country where you have no stake. It just doesn't make sense. So there's got to be something that we begin to look at, which is different, because otherwise, and then finally to say, oh yes, on paper it says minimum 30% women, but we're going to do it at 10%. Then what's the point? What's the point of all the paper? Right. So at some level, they have to be held accountable. And why is it? I mean, what amazes me is that you get all these big men politicians, and at the end of the day, all the huff and puff and all the bombast that happens, whether it's this regime or that regime, they manage to be. They're scared of women. They're scared of women in politics because women hold them accountable. Especially if it's independent women coming through, right? They hold them accountable. And it's ironic because you're meant to be, if you're a real man and if you're a really good man, you are meant to be protective. All of our cultures have that. That is, patriarchy is not just being oppressive, it's also about being protective, right? You can't have one side and not the other. So where is that happening? So whether we talk about it from culture, from power, from legal, from political, from economic, every single one of these issues has a reason why we as international actors are responsible to not enabling the worst elements. And we need to change our practices across the board in all these countries.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sanam. I really appreciate that. You actually called the elephant in the room. And I think it's, again, that the women in Sudan, from my knowledge and being involved with them, they are really fighting back and they are demanding. But the whole thing is the whole regime, the whole old system, or the patriarchal thinking is still there in place. And also most of them don't have a stake in what it takes. So they know that 10 years from now, their policies might not be affecting them when they retire. They have other places to go to. They have other countries to go to. And the women who are at the receiving end of all these shortages are not presented at the table. And this has been demanded over and over again, even from the women in the war zones. You cannot discuss peace without us. Who is these people are presenting? And sometimes when they have a woman, they will have one or two who are usually got their place at the table because they're confirming with the patriarchy system, not because their real agenda, gender agenda or something like that. That's how they got the ticket to the table, is by confirming to that system. So, Ms. Niemat, I will take this to you now to say what you think. I'm putting a context in Sudan.
Great. Yeah, it's a very unfortunate situation in Sudan that, like, in order for us to confront the challenge that right now we're facing in Sudan, we have to take this issue from the rhetoric to the reality. Just if we are using the reality on the ground, the reality of how women have been impacted over the last 30 years of al-Bashir ruling, but also the reality of the power and the strength and the resilience of women, but also their qualification and their ability to lead their community and to lead their country. And we should not accept less than having them participate. So right now, even if we talk about developing women agenda, developing the national action plan, who's going to implement that? Those men who are sitting there, most of them have committed crimes against women. The military, I think in the beginning, the women of Sudan and the people of Sudan have been betrayed by the regional actors. And why this agreement was really rushed between even the constitutional declaration that granted immunity for everyone serving in the transitional government, even if they commit crime, they cannot be held accountable. And then that allowed them to provide a shield for Bashir and other ICC indictees, people who have been indicted. And in the indictment of al-Bashir, in the text, the rape and sexual violence has been used as a tool of genocide. So the best option to do is having accountability. If we have accountability for crimes committed against women, that will send a signal to everybody that you cannot undermine women in this society and you can be free. But that's not the case right now. And that, again, the international community is also betraying the Sudanese women, because if there are thousands of women who have fallen victims for rape, thousands of women who have been beaten by a police officer or security agent or someone just affiliated with the National Congress Party, and they like to oppress women because they have a different views, then this change in the society will not happen. So in order for us to see real change, something had to happen right now to make sure that whether we are going to create a parallel women representing government that will be work hand in hand with the interim government, because if you are out of the fence, if our people say if you are not in the table, you cannot ask someone to eat for you while they are eating, that everybody will eat first for themselves. And then if there is a leftover, then they may help eat for you. So it's impossible to have women out of the fence and asking people within the fence to put something aside for women. So it's not going to go anywhere. So right now, there is a need for effort to put on empowering women, giving women voices, and stop the interim government and tell them, hey, you can't move forward. Right now, they appointed their cabinet of ministers. Even in the new changes, they have not, they reduce the number of women participating versus adding the number of women participating. So they are like doing all of this with immunity, because we as Sudanese, we have not effectively held them accountable, but also the international community is not holding them accountable. And if the international community is unable to hold them, then they have to empower the Sudanese people to hold them accountable. And that's women. And we also have to look at our narrative, the way we talk about things. Women issues are not women issues. Women issues are society issues. And until we make it clear that it's not about equal participation, it's about responsible participation between men and women. And we have to do an effort to reach out, like every single man sitting in that interim government, whether in the Sovereign Council or the Cabinet of Ministers, they have a wife and have a daughter. And they should not allow that to happen. But also, it comes to that, what is the agenda? Like, speaking about women in Sudan, it triggers something that's really serious, because those military personnel or the generals, they are involved with the Bashir government. And when you talk in Sudan about women, it triggers the idea of rape, sexual violence, oppression of women. If you allow more women in the table, that discussion may come. Also, the issue of accountability. If you empower women, then the accountability issue will be pushed forward. So that's kind of like, they have a genuine fear not to let women come in, but it has to be. There is no way that Sudan can move forward without women participation. But helping women from across the Sudan work together, ally themselves, form a strong alliance, and push their agenda forward and stop the interim government. I think we need to see women demonstration, like in all of these demonstrations, we see the overwhelming majority of women. Even the recent escalated violence in Darfur, whereby we have multiple cities, they organized sitting, including my hometown, Kapkabia. You see the colors and all of these colorful pictures because of women having the overwhelming majority, because this violence affecting them more than anyone else. So there is a need to stop these people. Hey, stop here, bring women in the table, because all of this decision has been made and with white women are excluded. So if we continue to make this decision, appointing the cabinet, appointing the legislative member, council, and appointing the governance, and women are out of the fence. So we put women in the position of weaknesses to come and beg these people to give them something, and they will only give them what they like to give, and they will prevent them from they don't like to give them. So, and that is not going to work. So conditioning it, and I think Ambassador Kelley mentioned something really important, that putting people the same people who invite terrorism to our country, who commit sexual violence and commit genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity against people. You cannot do the same things and expect different results. So, and also our hope in those who are in the cabinet of ministers, as Ms. Sanam mentioned, most of them, these are people who are coming from overseas. Their kids are in Washington, their families are in Washington, in Addis, and in London, and in some other places. So they really don't have a stake in what is going on the ground. And so make it simple. Give the leadership and give the power of decision making to those who are impacted by whatever have been going on in Sudan. I myself, people reach out to me when they were talking about the so nominating people for the interim government, and I said, no, hell no, I cannot take a position. You go to the camp in Darfur and you will find a best woman who can represent the women in Darfur within the Sovereign Council and within the Cabinet of Ministers. You cannot tell me that there are not qualified women better than me sitting inside Sudan. So it's like it's kind of like giving them an opportunity to get away, and we need to stop that and make that clear, whether for the international community or for the interim government in Sudan, but also for women themselves. This is a question that I have in mind: why Sudanese women are compromising and seeing all of this happen and staying aside and complaining? This is not the time for us to complain. It's time to go there, grab that opportunity, and stand up. I would love to see all streets in Sudan filled with women, stopping the traffic and letting them know that this country cannot move forward without women. Period. Thank you.
Thank you. That's an excellent segue to the next question that we have. It was about the leadership in the camp. But I just want to chime in about what you just said about women. And I think the lack of women representation is very prevalent, and we can see it and we can touch it. Because, for instance, when they had the committee to investigate the atrocities that happened on the 3rd of June, there was not one single woman in that committee. Not one single woman in the committee to investigate the atrocities that took place on the June 3rd. Not one single person, even among the men, who has any background or any information about gender-based violence. So the women, it's not only that women are not present, even the women agenda is not present. It's as long as women who have the woman agenda are at the table, you will never hear about our stories. Our stories will always be a second narrative or nothing. One of the arguments that have been circulating since the nomination of 2 women as governors is like, oh, we're going to have a governor who's going to get pregnant at some point, is going to be out of work. So what? So what? Women had always worked until the last minute. It's not about how many hours she puts in, it's about the quality. So it's quite interesting to see the absence manifestation in so many ways as the narrative, how people look at power, and how a lot of major entities within the government does not even take women's right into consideration, even when it comes to human rights, social justice, peace and security and all that. Last question that we have before we wrap it up is about the leadership in the refugee camps, and you can share stories about Sudan. I I know there are no shortage of that, of women's courage and resilience in hardship. So you may have a story to tell, Niemat, and also Ms. Sanam, if you have anything that you would like to share about women in refugee camps that we can take with us and honor them and honor their experience.
Thank you. I just wanted, before we talked about the refugee camps, which I think is so important, is I wanted to bring it back to the question of sexual violence and gender-based violence. This is not a women's issue, right? This is a men's issue. And we need to get men to own it, to talk about it. We need good men to own it and talk about it, because anytime you bring this up, whether it's about COVID or whether it's about sexual violence during war, it is always women who raise these things. It's not easy to do that. And there's and also it is because the minute women start talking about it, then men who have also been victimized begin to say this happened to us as well, because it's not just women, it happens to boys, it happens to others, right? It's a way of emasculating people. But the perpetrators are overwhelmingly men. And so if you want to be the leader of a country, if you want to be the military leader or the security guy or whatever it is, you better know how to handle these kinds of things. Because it is a security issue, number one. And number two, it's something that we need men to take on board and talk about and address. So this is something, again, that in our community and I think widely when we start to speak about things, we have to think about. There, as far as I'm concerned, there is no such thing as only a women's issue. Every issue is men and women's, but the tendency to force us to think about our bodies, what we're covered, whether as this is women's stuff, is a way of trying to distract us from talking about the other things, right? Whereas all these problems, it's theirs. Why do they care about whether I'm covered or not, or whether, so this is something that we have to think about. And then on the refugee camp, I'm sure Niemat has some amazing stories to tell. I'm always struck again by how we perceive refugees, because I say to people, imagine that you were the person who had to overnight end up in the middle of nowhere, sleeping rough, looking after your kids, having to protect them. You don't know where the food is coming from, whether you're going to get a blanket, whether you're going to get a covering, and this is going to go on and on. The majority of us would probably go crazy, right? The majority of us, whoever's listening, probably wouldn't be able to cope. And yet, what do we see? We see women day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, doing this. And while they're doing it, they are always looking after the kids, the sick, the elderly, the young guys who come and go. We had I was talking to a colleague from South Sudan a while ago, and she said in South Sudan, women don't have time to die. And by this, she meant that the young are going off and killing each other, the young men. The elder men, the elders of the society and the communities and so forth, are so desperately depressed and horrified by what's happened to their community that they're actually also getting sick and incapable of doing anything. And yet the women are left to get up in the morning, figure out how you're going to feed people, how are you going to clothe them, how are you going to look after them, who's going to get water, they don't have time to die. They don't have the luxury of sitting and being depressed. We don't even have the luxury of being allowed to be angry and expressing that anger. If you think about this COVID stuff, that, men are at home and they're frustrated, and women get frustrated too, and yet they carry on. We have to start to articulate and shine a light on these issues and explain it and explain the strength that comes with that. And that's what needs to be in those moments where those decisions are being. Because these are the people who have shown with their own bodies that they care enough to protect and enough about the future of their families and their communities, and they know what's going on. Most important, they know what the reality is. So to the international community, we have to talk about it like this, and to the national leaders. The Sudanese leadership should be proud of what amazing women they have in the country. They should be proud of being able to bring them as an asset to shape the future of the country. where's the messaging around that, and who's bringing that to the table. So I just want us to sort of think about that, and again, thinking about the women in refugee camps and all that they do as an amazing testament of just unbelievable strength, and how much more recognition they deserve. Thank you.
Well, speaking about leadership in the refugees camp, I will tell you, Azaz, and everyone listening to this conversation, I'm doing what I am doing is because of those women in the refugee and internally displaced camps. You cannot imagine how strong, resilient, and resolve of these women. People have about leadership, they have a perception. They think if, as Sanam mentioned, that this being a refugee or being a displaced person is happening overnight. And if it happened in Washington, I think everyone would go crazy, would go crazy. And these people did not have the luxury of being crazy. They did not have the luxury of dying. They did not have the luxury of complaining. They just immediately pick up the challenge of doing everything possible to see their community survive, to see their family survive, and still are able to go out and speak about their issues and about their society's issues. I do think if we want to go forward in Sudan, we should have a woman, internal displaced person or refugee president of Sudan, if Sudan is to be fixed. I hope and pray to live and see that day happen, because when I went to Kurdistan, Iraq, again, I found that they created this a minister that is specifically dealing with the survivors. And every single sensitive minister or commission has been led by a survivor, the only survivor in their family, either a woman or a man. It has to be those type of people, like in various cities and states, they have put these people. And you cannot imagine how much progress they have achieved without, like, unfortunately, because of the ISIS involvement and everything, things didn't go well. But the change that they were able to do in their community on the ground, because that is a personal, like, peace is something personal for them. Accountability is something personal for them. And it is the same thing would be for a woman in Sudan. And like, people sometimes they think of a refugee and internal displaced woman as these are like nothing. They are just like refugees. So how do you define refugee or internally displaced? I was in this conference in Addis 7 years ago, and I met this woman professor who's teaching at Al-Fashir University. But she introduced herself. She never introduced herself as a professor. She introduced herself as an internally displaced person representative. And she said, I was displaced and I live in Kasab camp. And when I come to Al-Fashir, I also live in Abu Shok camp because the university offered me residence. But I do not want to make my people feel, because we have been displaced, that now I can be differently identified because of my education. And the camps are full of these people who have demonstrated an outstanding leadership. They have the knowledge, they know their issues. And look at all of these cities that are right now protesting are led by women. And who are these women? Women from the camp. They are fearless and they know the society's issues, and they have a huge heart. When they speak, they don't speak about women in the internally displaced camp. They speak about women in the entire Sudan, and they don't have bitterness against all those women in Sudan who have been silent for years, have not spoken for women in the internally displaced camp. No, they say, because the government has divided us, because many people don't know what we were going through. Now is the time, and they say we can come together and we can change our country. And they are adopting fully the revolution slogans of like freedom, peace and justice. And that is, I think, the real leadership is outstanding in the internally displaced camp. And we need to recognize, not just recognize, but invest in that. And on top of that, what struck you, me, I have worked the last time before I was forced to flee the Sudan. I was working for WFP, and I go there. You see these women who have been victims of rape, and when the first thing identify them, that the smile. When they see you, greet you with a smile, and that is the strength that we like you can imagine all what I have so many stories. If I wanted to tell the stories of the strength and leadership of women in the internal displaced camp, you have to sit here for a month and I would never be done with the stories. But I hope that a day will come to provide a space for women to write those stories and share it with not only the Sudanese people, but also people around the globe to see the strengths of women. And women issues can be prioritized and women can be empowered if we can all, not in Sudan, not in Darfur, around the world, can think and act within the context that women issues are the same. Whether you are in DC here in my backyard, or whether in the United States, or in the Middle East, or in Sudan, in Darfur, the way issues are impacting women are the same. And one example, when women have been targeted for rape, and the majority of Sudanese remain silent, and the accountability hasn't been achieved for those who perpetrated crime in Darfur. During the sit-in in June 3rd, I call it the cost of immunity, which is very unfortunate. They use the same tool. They raped women who demonstrated, stood in front of the military barracks in Khartoum to tell them that they can demonize them and undermine them if they do not leave and go home. And that is exactly, if we allow this to happen to a woman somewhere around the world whereby they don't have enough platform to speak, then we will allow it to happen for us someday. And that is what we need to do, to make women issues a common goal for all of us. And women issues are not women issues, they are societal issues, and we have all together, we have to form an equal partnership, and not equal, I call it responsible partnership, whereby both men and women in the society take equal responsibility of addressing these issues that are affecting women and demonizing and destroying our societies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Niemat. And I think also having representations from the IDP camps, whether it be men or women, it's a form of like actually materializing transitional justice in a way, because you're recognizing their experiences, you're actually letting them be part of the leadership and to tell their stories and be like a symbol of that. So I think the recognizing of people who have gone through these atrocities is very important, regardless of their gender. We've gone way above our time, but the conversation is very rich and enjoying. Like, I really enjoyed this very much, and I'm honored to have you all and to be part of this panel. Thank you so much. You're free if you have a last parting words that you would like to share with us. And thank you again for your time. And it's been an honor and pleasure to moderate this. And I've learned a lot talking to you all ladies. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I wish Sudan all the luck in the world. It is the rest of us are watching, those of us who come from other countries with 40 years of dictatorship and the kinds of issues that you're dealing with, which is, really profound. But I think the world really wants Sudan to succeed. When I was there, I wanted it to be the next South Africa that gave us so much hope back in the 1990s. So anything that I can do moving forward. But I think some of these issues are as I say, the question of leadership and where do they have skin in the game, let's put it that way, to make them committed to taking on tough issues, I think is important. And good luck with the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to sincerely thank our presenters and our moderator for your efforts and for joining us. And I also would like to thank Senator Jaffer. She's not present with us, and we also want to send our condolences from here to her. She lost her cousin, and she's supposed to be in a funeral. But also, I'm appreciative for the fact that she is able to connect us to this remarkable and an amazing leader and a strong voice for women, not only women issues, but also for advancement of human rights around the globe. The last word I will say is that this is the 21st century, and we shouldn't be arguing about women need to be included or not. It's out of question. But it's only happened if we demanded it, and it won't happen if we are sitting by and expecting someone else to do it for us. And it's the same goes to the international community and also to various like individual government and also to the leadership in Sudan, how they want to take Sudan. Do they want to take Sudan backward the same way that al-Bashir did, or do they want to take Sudan forward? And that's the challenge. But education and awareness raising within the society itself, because it's really important, and also an effort from the stakeholders working on Sudan to empower women, but also condition women empowerment within any kind of support that they're giving to the Sudanese government, and accountability for crimes committed against women. This will pave the way for women empowerment, but also effective participation of women. That will set the foundation for Sudan to be effectively transformed, and will set the foundation for democratic and sustainable development and peace in Sudan. Thank you again.
Thank you so much again. Thank you everybody who tuned in, and those who are going to be watching it later. Thank you so much. Be safe, be well, and have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Signing out now. Of course.
Hi, Janet.
Okay.